and welcome to 27Crows Radio. I'm Bree, and today I'm delighted to have back on Simon Roche. Simon is the head of the Office of the HQ of the world's largest non-state civil defense organization for Sightlanders of South Africa. He's given many speaking tours and raises awareness concerning the coming catastrophe taking place in South Africa. This is his second appearance on my podcast, and he comes by popular demand. A few of the alt-right girls I chat with and stay in touch with on a regular basis asked me to bring him on to discuss the recent events in Charlottesville, given that he attended the rally. And for those wondering why it took me so long to discuss this, as I've stated before, I like to wait until the dust settles so I can get the facts out. I tried filming a couple of times while the events were taking place, and every time I tried, something new happened and it made everything I said before irrelevant. So I figured, okay, I'm going to wait a few days so we can get the facts out there. And I wanted to bring on Simon because I thought, given that he was there, he can give us a much more accurate perception of what happened over what the lying dinosaur media has been saying. So welcome again, Simon.
Thank you very much for having me, Bree, and thank you for being willing to do this so late at night. It's a little bit unfair on you, but I've had some time constraints. I appreciate it.
No problem whatsoever. I'll always make time for you because I enjoy having you on. Now, I was glued to my computer and my phone during the entire day of the protest and the day before. The march the night before was beautiful, and from what I understand, it was modeled off of the torchlit marches that they do in Sweden and Finland, and I've seen nationalists and resistance movements in Europe do the exact same thing to great effect throughout Europe. I thought it was stunning and inspirational. Then Saturday, things went kind of downhill. Can you tell me about your experience and we can discuss it from there?
Okay, yes, certainly, Bree. About 2 months ago, I first began saying to people that I'd like to attend the Unite the Right event on the 12th of August at Lee Park in Charlottesville, because I think that it is a seminal event, or I expected that it would be a seminal event in the nascent new right in the United States of America. I made it clear right from the very beginning to everybody that I spoke to, but I will not get involved. My reasoning was simple. On a moral level, I don't think it's right for somebody to come from far away and become embroiled in domestic politics. I wouldn't appreciate it if you came to South Africa.
I think that's honorable. I hate it when politicians go to foreign countries and try to tell other people what to do. Yeah.
Right. And legally, I'm here on a visa, obviously, and it's just not clever. It's not what clever people do.
It's sticky.
Yeah. So, on the Friday night, the guys that I was with, who were about 100 in number, didn't go to the Tiki Torch Parade. They had a full briefing session by their leader and by their kind of the guy who'd done the planning for the event on Saturday. Full briefing session on what may be done, what may not be done, and sort of a recounting of the conversations that they had held with the police. They'd gone
now
to
let that be known to people. They spoke to police beforehand.
Yeah, they went and met with the police and found out all of the laws and asked, what may we do, what may we not do, what should we do, what shouldn't we do. Two salient things were said. Firstly, no masks under any circumstances. Anybody who wears a mask of whatsoever nature, including a gas mask, will be liable to arrest and prosecution. Obviously, the people complained because they said, what if the anti-fascismus use a gas on us, spray and gas and what have you? The leadership of the organization said, it doesn't matter. You may not wear a mask, end of story. Secondly, no knives. Some of the guys said, well, I don't have anything else. I don't have a stick. I don't have a this. I don't have a gun. I don't have a whatever. Again, the leadership said, it doesn't matter what you do or don't have. You may not take a knife with you. Finish and end of story.
And from what I understand, Virginia is a state that respects handgun licenses for people. It has a dual respect between states. Continue.
Yeah, so they gave a bit of a lecture on that. At one point, they said, does anybody have any questions? And I put up my hand and said, although I've come with you guys, they had invited me, please bear in mind that I will not participate. In other words, if you feel you see me wandering off somewhere, please don't think that I'm being ill-disciplined according to all the rules and regulations that you as an organization have given us, about discipline and proper behavior. I'm here as an observer. They said, no problem. The next morning, I got a construction helmet, a white helmet, and I painted on the side, observer. And during the entire event, I stood off to one side, not very far away, but not in the thick of things, where I would have loved to have been, obviously, quite exciting. We arrived at a parking garage, and if anybody has Google Earth and they wish to press pause during watching this video, it might be very helpful to them to bring up Google Earth and to go into Lee Park and just to look at the very simple layout of Lee Park. The road that runs more or less on the southern end is called Market Street. East Market Street is one portion, and Ordinary Market Street is the other portion. I don't know. We don't use east, west, south, north for roads where I come from, so I'm not very good with that. But anyway, it's Market Street. Then there are two roads that run along the side, running from south to north, one on the west side and one on the east side. And then at the top is a road called Jefferson Street. It's very, very simple. We came along Market Street from the east, in other words, the right-hand side as you're looking at the screen, from a parking garage where everybody had gathered. And there we were about 100 people, and as the people filed out, I endeavored to count how many there were, and there were about 100 in our group, then about 30 to 35 in another group, which was with us, another organization, then a gang of about 15 or 20 guys, and then about 6, I would say, call it 8, call it 10, call it 12 for luck, of the National Socialist Movement people, who we'll come to later on.
So it's, very, 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 very small portion of people.
Yeah. I would say about 6, but let's call it 12. Let's give the benefit of the doubt to the naysayers. And they were right at the back. Coming along Market Street from the east towards the west, at about 50 yards from the flight of steps that we ended up using to get onto Lee Park, the Antifa began to attack us. It's vital that people who are not sure about this thing, who's lying, who's not lying, should know that the attacks began with the Antifa. Our guys were in 3 files, like soldiers marching down a road in 3 files, and the discipline was impeccable. This I can swear to. I was there, I saw it, it's on video, and it's in many photographs that I took.
I was at Charlottesville 1.0, and it was very much the same way. Very organized, very disciplined.
Yes, and then these Antifa guys came running in from the side and smacking people, pushing them to the ground, and so on. And so there were some scuffles instigated by the Antifa.
As they usually are.
Yes. We then came to a police car parked in the middle of the road. Now, the police had not intervened. I think, Bree, that we can agree that it's fundamental, it's rudimentary in policing terms that you endeavor to separate people if you know that they are potential belligerents. This is not sophisticated policing. This is not the PhD of policing. This is basic.
Very basic.
And it's universal. Right.
People who don't get along, you put them in their separate corners.
Right. Even more so when you have riot police. All police know this as a basic, but riot police know it particularly. And it's vital that the people who don't really know the story and they're wondering who the good guys and who the bad guys and so on should recognize that the police chose not to separate the two parties in blatant contravention of the police's, not mine, the police's fundamental principles of police work. Vital. There was a police car parked at the intersection of Market Street and the street running down the east side of Lee Park. And those police were nowhere to be seen. They had moved off. When the scuffles began, now it's one thing to keep people apart, it's another thing to intervene. So if you fail to execute your mandate properly in terms of the law, and some conflict should happen, clearly you have a legal obligation by law as a policeman to intervene to prevent a crime by law. It's not that they didn't do it, it's that under law they failed to do it.
That's absolutely terrifying to me. It proves that they are essentially just working for the establishment, and we can't count on them on any level whatsoever in the future should we have rallies or any kind of protest whatsoever. And it makes your average person that might want to come see what we're about scared to death because they know that we're going to be on our own.
Well, it got worse, Bree. The Antifa then formed a line across Market Street, preventing this group of just short of 200 people that I was observing from the curb side, from passing. So there were some scuffles as people tried to push their way through, and at one point the Antifa prevented Dr. Michael Hill of the League of the South from passing. A grand old man, a dignified man, a true gentleman with his walking cane. And there was one particular girl who danced in front of him like a marionette, not letting him pass, until he just walked further and further and further around her in his grave, solemn, dignified manner. And I watched it very closely, and eventually she appeared to become embarrassed at her own behavior, and she just stopped and let him continue. And so with much ado, the people arrived at the set of stairs in the bottom right-hand corner of the park, on the corner of Market Street and the street that runs on the eastern length of the park, which is 2nd Street Northeast. It is a broad, short flight of stairs. The topography of the park is very simple. The streets that run on the west side and the east side run at a bit of an incline, but the park is somewhat level. In other words, at one point the park is close to the road, then as the road declines and the park remains level, it is obviously higher than the road. Very simple. The highest portion of the park is on Market Street. And that flight of steps in the bottom right-hand corner is a fairly short one. I suppose it goes up, I don't know, altogether maybe 5 feet or so.
I remember it.
Right. So this group of 200 people proceeded up that flight of steps. Now, another very simple thing. People should consider that the park was cut in half just before the statue in question. So in other words, if you walked onto the park, you could walk up to a barricade and not quite reach the statue. It was cut in half that way. It was then cut in half again. So on the portion of the park adjacent to Market Street, on the left-hand side was a pen made of barriers with 4 signs. On the right-hand side was a pen of the same size, but made of barriers only on 3 sides. The one side was left open. The police had chosen to leave this barrier, this enclosure open for reasons best known to them. Why they should enclose the one and not enclose the other, these 2 pens were intended for the people coming to attend the event. Nobody will ever know, probably, not the truth anyway. But they left it open, and this is vital to understand. So upon these 200 people entering this right-hand pen, the left-hand pen, when standing on Market Street and looking at the park up towards the statue, the left-hand pen was already full. We were latecomers, more or less. The event was due to begin at 12 o'clock. This is also vital. At 12 o'clock. Right. Upon entering, the Antifa began to throw bottles filled with urine and some bottles filled with water, but many bottles filled with urine, and plastic bags filled with urine, and some feces. I got hit by feces once, and some stones, and they began whacking people with poles and various instruments, and you would have seen the aerosol can flamethrower that was.
I saw. For those of you unfamiliar, you can probably Google it. It was an image of a black man with a flamethrower, like a homemade flamethrower, and a man with a flag trying to push him away in self-defense.
Right. Now, I'd like to say one thing more, which I hope that people will appreciate. Bree, I knew of one of our group of people who had pepper spray. One. Let's say there were 10, 20, 30, 40. Please believe me when I say to you that the Antifa must have had a bare minimum of 200 cans of that spray.
I remember
a very bare minimum.
Mike Enoch kept saying over and over, I listened to some of his podcasts and listened to other people in the movement telling people, don't bring weapons, because if something happens, we will get the blame. It doesn't matter how small. It doesn't matter if it is in self-defense. We will get the blame. And that's exactly what happened.
And that was the word that was heeded. Immediately, we've now entered the park. The leaders called upon a gang of young guys with shields to create a shield wall at the bottom of the stairs leading up to the park. For the simple reason that having gone onto the park now, we were being pummeled from behind. I say we because I was more or less with that group. You can see in the photographs and the videos that I was off to one side, but I was in that closer to them than I was to anywhere else. Always standing to one side with my shoulders crossed, this helmet on, observer written on the side, but I was there. And I witnessed these missiles coming in over our heads. It was obviously frightening. So these young chaps, under the leadership of Michael Tubbs, formed a shield wall courageously, simply for the simple reason that there was no other way to keep the Antifa away from the people, because the barricade was missing. The police had freely elected not to put up a barricade to enclose that pen on the right-hand side. Why they'd ever chosen to have two pens, in other words, to split in half the area that was going to be occupied by the Unite the Right patrons, as it were, I don't know. Nevertheless, it was very, very vulnerable to the Antifa, who kept on running up, hitting people, pushing, shoving, kicking, spitting, saying motherfucker and all of this, swearing, getting in people's faces and swearing all the time. So rightly, these guys created a barricade, I should say, at the bottom with their shields. And so the fight went on for an hour and a half, and the police did not intervene. It is beyond justification. If the police were trained plumbers, or if they were trained bricklayers, or if they were trained accountants, you could sort of excuse it. But they were trained policemen who chose not to intervene in a clear situation where assault with intent to commit grievous bodily harm was being perpetrated repeatedly for an hour and a half.
Very similar to the Berkeley police, who were told to stand down.
This is a cut and dried thing. They stood by and witnessed as a series of crimes was committed on an ongoing basis for an hour and a half. Now, I would hasten to remind your viewers, Bree, that the people on the park, the Unite the Right 2.0 Charlottesville people, had obtained a permit, and they'd subsequently obtained an approval from a federal judge.
And the counter-protesters did not have approval, by the way.
And they were in the street. They were blocking the free flow of traffic. Right. This should say something to thinking people. Now I'd like to address the matter of the quasi-Nazi or crypto-Nazi symbols. If we are to be given a black mark for it, that is to say, if the right the right-wing, racist, maniac, lunatics, neo-Nazis that we're being portrayed as.
Which they call us all the time anyway, yeah.
They do, and it's beyond fathoming, Bree. I am famously a Yudophile, and you can imagine I get flack for it all of the time. I'm not Jewish. I'm not a damned Jewish traitor, but I have been openly for many years sympathetic to Jews in the spirit of Genesis 12, verse 3. Now, of course, people say, well, okay, maybe, but they're not the real Jews. They Khazars, Khazars. And I always say to them, you can't have it both ways in life. You can't have a string of affairs and expect your wife not to leave you. You can't come home drunk every night and expect your wife to be happy. Similarly, you cannot make that claim when your demigod, Dr. David Duke, has specifically and categorically and repeatedly explained that there is no evidence whatsoever, genetic evidence, for the claim that the modern Jews, the two tribes of Israel, are in fact Khazars from the Caucasus, from the Trans-Caucasus region. You cannot have it both ways. Choose one. So I hope to God that I don't get flack over this thing, because it's by definition
in my experience,
irrational.
when you talk about the Jews, you'll always get flack. It doesn't matter what you say. I mean,
exactly.
I have things that I understand about the Jews, and I have things that I'm critical of. I see both sides, and for that I will probably always get flack. But yeah, back to the crypto-Nazi thing you were saying.
Which brings me to my point. Speaking as somebody who has no Jewish gripe, think, guys, think. Apply your minds, guys. What about the Soviet flags that were there? How can you in good conscience say that the right wing is bad because 6 young boys had crypto-Nazi symbols
Out
and
of
30 people
hundreds or thousands of people, yeah.
And 50 people had a Union of Soviet Socialist Republic flags, under which far more people were killed than the Nazis could ever have done if they'd remained in power for another 100 years. And I say this, I insist again, I say this as somebody who has no gripe against the Jews. But the fact that I don't have a gripe with the Jews doesn't make me mentally retarded. I can still damn well think for myself. The simple fact, Bree, is that there were some young boys who had these ugly, horrible Nazi flags. There was 1 or 2 of these crypto-Nazi flags.
Yeah, I saw maybe 2 Nazi flags out of kind of completely fine
and there was
ones.
one guy who gave a Nazi salute.
You'll always get your crazies. Yeah, you'll always get a few outliers.
If we're going to get a black mark for it, then please, BBC, have the grace to give a black mark to the Antifa carrying their Union of Soviet Socialist Republic flags, standing in the street, blocking traffic without a permit to be there. The Antifa who began throwing the missiles. Think.
And when I think about it, my thing is, people are always getting on to white males as far as, why don't you do anything? Why don't you stand up? Why don't you stick up for your people? And then when they go out there and do it, they're called Nazis. Yeah. And I'm sorry, exactly. I do consider the people who attended this rally, regardless of whether or not they had a Nazi flag, to be brave for at least standing up for something and standing up against all the anti-white hatred that's going on in this country. And even those boys who were sig heiling or having Nazi flags were probably there helping other people escape and get out of there.
Well, look, to their credit, you can say anything, and I'm the first to say it. I'm the first to take the side of the Jews against the side of the Hitlerites. But I will say this now in spite of that. Those young boys were damn courageous because they stood there with their shields. Some of them about as frail as my pinky finger. I don't think some of those kids weighed more than 110 pounds. And they stood there courageously for an hour and a half while the police did not have the courage to intervene. They stood there like men, because they thought that it was the right thing to do to prevent the Antifa from running behind the group of 200 and attacking them from behind. Good for them.
Is it true that
I don't care what anybody says.
I don't care either. I totally agree. Is it true that the police funneled you guys toward the Antifa and only let you have one exit out of there?
It's unbelievable, Bree. It's unbelievable. If you believe this, well, there's something wrong with you, because I wouldn't believe it if somebody told me.
There's no hope, yeah.
The policeman came down. They cancelled the event on the basis the policeman came down with the bullhorn, and I was the closest of everybody to him because I was off to one side in my little construction worker's helmet with this observer emblazoned on the side. I was nearest to this policeman, and I stood there a long time listening to what he said as he came down 2nd Street Northeast, downwards towards Market Street, down the slope, with his bullhorn, with about, I should guess, something like 35 riot policemen behind him. And for about 20 minutes, I estimate, I should think certainly not less than 15, he stood there and said, I'm paraphrasing to the best of my recollection, "By the powers invested in the governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia, this event is declared illegal. Clear the park and clear the road. Clear the road." Now, it was very obvious what was happening. The people on the park were kind of half responding, reluctantly, but the people on the road, the Antifa, were not moving at all. So he himself chose, of his own volition, to repeat the road more than the park. He was always saying, "Clear the park and the road. You must also clear the road," and so on and so forth. So he gave double the notice to the Antifa who were there in the main road without a permit. Now, very interestingly, the police told us that the governor had declared a state of emergency. Okay? In other words, there's an emergency crisis, an emergent crisis in the state of Virginia because 25 or 30 people are throwing water bottles at one another, and the police are unwilling of their own volition to intervene.
And that was at 10:30, an hour and a half before the speeches were meant to begin, right?
It was before we'd arrived on site and before the event. His thing was at 6 minutes past 11. Look at the timeline. The documents and what have you were done at 10:30. The announcement was made at 6 minutes past 11. The event was only meant to begin at 12. The fracas began after the declaration of the state of emergency. Think, everybody. Think. Ignore BBC. They're bad people. They've always been bad people. Even if you're a normie, even if you're a middle-of-the-road Christian conservative, it's a lie. It's a lie. It's a lie. This is not a conspiracy theory. It's a conspiracy.
Against
simple as that.
The people who were at this rally, which, guys, maybe there were 12 neo-Nazis there at the most. A lot of them were, some were alt-right. There was a lot of alt-right. There were Proud Boys there, and there were mainstream conservatives there. So it was a mixture.
There were guys like me there. There were, you only have to look at the photographs to see the fresh-faced, bright-eyed, well-deported, decent, respectable young men who were in this group of 200. And then look at, with all due respect, the gene pool that found itself in the road. I say this with respect and love. There, but for the grace of God, go I. I could have been one of those people, It's not me who made me. It's my parents and God who made me. So I have nothing against them. But you can't compare the two gene pools. You cannot. There's no comparison to be made. On the one hand is these upright, broad-shouldered, broad-chested, dignified, chin up in the air, lovely young men. And on the other side is a bunch of people who look yucky.
With half-shaved heads and rainbow unicorn hair.
Yeah, it never ends, the description of them.
Yeah, that's kind of true.
So, eventually, after about at least 15 minutes, I'd say closer to 20, of this guy saying, "Get off the park and get out of the road, get out of the road," the people on the park began to file off. But before they did, a couple of people went up to the police and said, how do we get out of here? These people are going to attack us. Now, the police then came onto the park from the right, that is to say the east, to the left, that is to say the west, meaning that the people were driven towards the flight of stairs, a narrow, long flight of stairs in the bottom left-hand corner of the park, as it were, the southwest corner of the park, not the broad, short flight of stairs in the bottom right-hand corner, as you look at Google Earth, or the southeast corner. The narrow, long flight of stairs going down to Market Street. And the Antifa were there. The Antifascismus, I'm sure you're familiar that they are named after an overtly communist group from Weimar, Germany. In fact, their flag, their emblem, is modeled on the emblem of oh, by the way, just as a matter of interest, you may or may not know this, Bree, the Antifa in Weimar, Germany were founded at the instigation of Leon Trotsky.
That does not surprise me.
Yeah, Leon Trotsky said, we will never, ever win this thing unless we have people to fight against the right wing. They are specifically a shock troop. They're not a group of people that works at the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals on Saturdays and happen to be there this particular Saturday, or I don't know what, they work at the St. John's Children's Home usually, but they are specifically a shock troop. Please, people, look it up. Tell the president, tell your senator, tell your representative, tell your mayor, tell your governor.
We need to get them on a terrorist watch list.
Yeah, I wouldn't bother telling BBC because I think that they know and they specifically don't want to. But it seems to me that a lot of people have not bothered to do any research on this thing at all, because this information is available. It's freely available. Coming down these stairs, there was a gauntlet to be run of the Antifa, who now started smashing these people over and over and over again. And then it calmed down a bit and the people passed freely. But can you imagine for yourself, Bree, can you imagine being in charge of the policing and saying, you know what, we'll put up a couple of pens and we'll leave one open for no reason. When the people come in, if they get attacked, we won't intervene. And we will never keep them apart. And then when they leave, we will force them to go right through the Antifa.
Which they did. There's footage of that, of them being pushed directly into the mob of Antifa.
This is my point. And I must not, under any circumstances, separate the groups as they leave. So you can imagine what happened. Solely by virtue of the police's actions and by virtue of nobody else at all. Not even Antifa. This is not Antifa's fault. It's wrong to blame Antifa for this. Only the police. Not because I say so, but because there is such a thing as syllogistic logic. A posteriori syllogistic logic. The police and the police alone created those final battles down Market Street when the Antifa chased after for half an hour.
And if they had policed the streets, that car incident never would have happened, because I saw the footage that Faith Goldie had, and they were allowed to just run wild throughout the streets.
Of course it wouldn't have happened, because the two groups would have never been together in the first place.
Regardless of whether or not it was premeditated or whether or not the car was attacked, we don't know yet, but it would not have happened if the police had been doing their job and monitoring the streets.
Bree, this is basic stuff. This is not, if you were a plumber, you could say, oh, I didn't know, It should have been obvious to me. I'm sorry, I'm so stupid. I was having a bad day. But how do you, as the police commander, justify this series of actions? It's phenomenal, Bree. It's phenomenal, huh? This is phenomenal. And so it was that all of those head injuries occurred, the majority of those head injuries occurred in that Market Street section, where the Antifa chased after the stragglers and smacked them and beat them as they were trying to get away. This is not opinion, Bree. This is fact.
This is why the right-wingers bring shields and helmets. People in the media are saying, oh, they had shields and helmets. They were clearly coming for a fight. No, they came because the Antifa bring the fight. That's why they bring this protection gear.
Of course, I can tell you that I won't do that again without a shield and a helmet.
Good Lord, no.
Not that I have any intention.
And goggles after what
fair.
happened to Baked
But
Alaska.
Yeah, of course, yes. It's terrifying, Bree, to be in that situation with bottles raining down on you, hitting you on the head, and then poo smacking you in the cheek. It's horrible, very no good, a frightening experience. And now it is the best of all. I got lost when I left. I was obviously apart from everybody. You know,
when you guys go to these events, you have to travel in packs.
Well, I endeavored to remain conspicuously apart. You know, I really made it my mission to be able to say I didn't get involved. I wasn't part of the gang. I wasn't in the midst of it. In being apart, I got a bit separated and then lost. Mm-hmm. So I retraced my steps and came back up Market Street from the west, intending to go the length of Market Street, past Lee Park on my left-hand side, and onwards to the Market Street garage. I couldn't go that way because it was closed off by the police, and so I had to do a long detour. But I got almost to Lee Park, and imagine my surprise when I discovered that the Antifa hadn't been forced to leave. They were still there, half an hour later.
Not surprised in the slightest. I saw that being reported on the periscopes. And I knew then. I knew it was probably set up maybe by the governor or the mayor for people that Nathan D'Amico and Richard Spencer wouldn't get the chance to speak at all because they weren't even allowed to get on the stage. But when I saw that the leftists, the Antifa, the communists were allowed to run wild in the streets, I knew the police must have been given an order to stand down.
And then we're not obliged. Then we're not obliged to disperse, even though they were there in the first place without a permit, and they were in this thoroughfare, and even though they'd been told. I hope people have a recording of this. They'd been told more than the people on the park by virtue of the fact that this policeman with the megaphone kept on reiterating it. More than the people on the park, that they too had to disperse. But as soon as everybody's backs were turned and they'd cordoned the area off, they left the Antifa alone. If this is not deliberate, then I ask you, Bree, what is the meaning of the word deliberate? Let's pull out our dictionaries, because, so I got back to this parking garage, and there are numerous videos to show this. The elderly men, I'd like to point out their ages. I traveled in a group of one 62-year-old man, one 70-year-old man, and one 72-year-old man, and then a chap of about 31, and I'm 46. These elderly men were assaulted just about in front of the police station, which is next to the parking garage. The Antifa guys had lain in wait, and as they came up as stragglers in separated little groups, little clusters of 3 and 4 people, the Antifa rushed down and got them on the ground and beat them up. Old men, Bree, and it's on video.
They have no shame. Oh, and I saw just a tidbit for people. The mayor of Virginia raised the Antifa flag on their, I think it was one of their official buildings. He actually raised the Antifa flag, and I have another eyewitness who told me that he saw government officials, who I shall not name, laughing gleefully after all these deaths happened, because they were so thrilled they took down the alt-right, laughing about it.
The conclusion is unavoidable, Bree. Even if you love BBC, even if you think they're ever so well-spoken British gentlemen.
Come on, you know
whatever,
me. Come on.
ABC, NBC, well, I mean the generic you. ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN. It's clear. We have to conclude that this thing was deliberate and the media was complicit in it. Why do I say that? First, we've proven already that it's deliberate. The evidence is compelling that it was deliberate. But on top of that, the media have not reported any of the evidence which I've shared with you and which people can very easily verify. Yeah, it's easy to verify the things that I've said. The media have chosen not to do so. That means that there is at some level a collusion. It's an inescapable conclusion.
And at this point, if evidence comes out to the contrary, they seek to silence it because it shows that they were knowingly lying. Pax Dickinson had his Twitter page suspended because he was laying out truth bombs.
Well, yeah, look, there's not much more to say than that. And I, unfortunately, as we discussed earlier, have to leave shortly for a long journey. I don't know if you've got any more questions, but to come back to what you were saying, not to be abrupt, you know, in the light of the fact that the clock is counting down, I think that we've made a very strong, frankly, irrefutable case for the fact that there was a series of events that led to a very purposeful effect.
I completely agree, and I wanted to thank you for taking the time to tell my viewers this, because I was so thrilled to hear that you were there and I could get a source from somebody who was there and wanted to tell everybody the logical truth about what happened. But yes.
Okay. Can I give a quick free advertisement for Sightlanders?
Yes, I was going to say, tell people where to find you and where they can help out with Sightlanders.
Thank you very much, Bree. For those watching, my name is Simon Roche, and I represent Sightlanders, sightlanders.org. That's SUIDLANDERS, the world's largest civil defense organization, a South African organization preparing for a civil war, which the leaders in South Africa have begun promising, saying that there will be a race-based civil war in South Africa, and that in 5 years' time there will be no whites left in South Africa. That we are preparing as a civil defense organization, non-militant, non-seditionist, non-insurrectionist. We are preparing vital necessities for civilian non-combatants. If anybody would like to donate, please, we desperately need all the help that we can get. $10 translates to 130 Rand in our currency. We can buy a cheap sleeping bag for $10. Please consider helping us. Please donate, and you can donate on the homepage of that website that I just gave you, sightlanders.org. In the bottom right-hand corner, there's a PayPal link, which is very easy to use. Please help, please help, please help.
And on that note, I also did an interview with Simon about everything pertaining to what's happening in South Africa right now. For those of you who aren't aware, please go check out that video. I have it linked down below for you to go and watch and learn more about the Sightlanders and Simon's cause. It is absolutely imperative that you check it out and you maintain a level of awareness as to what's happening to the whites in South Africa, now with apartheid being gone. So with that being said, thank you so much, Simon, for taking the time to join me today.
Thank you for having me, Bree.
Great. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.